Hello everyone, today in geometry we are going to look at drawing in perspective. And the reason why we're covering this in geometry is part of geometry is examining shapes and understanding how they act in 2 dimensions versus 3 dimensions, in real life versus our own ideas of them. And perspective actually has a large impact on how we view objects. Take, for example, this hallway or these 2 train tracks running through this subway. Notice how these lines, which we know in reality are parallel, appear to intersect, which lines do not do in geometry. In fact, if we walked along these tracks in real life, we wouldn't reach a magical point where the 2 tracks touched. Instead, it would continue to just go on parallel to each other. And that is because our brains process things that are far away as smaller than things that are close to us. And that means that when we look at objects, what we're seeing is not always what is really there. And that's an important thing to remember. We have to be aware of the limits of our own perception. But before we get too philosophical about that, which we definitely could, let's just look at how we can imitate this to make what we draw look like what we actually see and get some practice with point perspective. So these 3 pictures here are all drawn with what is called one-point perspective. In one-point perspective, all of the objects are running towards a single point that they seem to vanish into. Since that point is what they vanish into, we call it a vanishing point. So here we have a vanishing point here, and these 2 are not as clear. Frequently the object will shut down or will end, like the hallway will end, prior to where it would hit its vanishing point. So what we can do is we can find the vanishing point by extending the lines that run to it. And let me show you where this would be. Take a ruler or any straight edge really and extend those lines that are running towards each other outward. So I took the corner here, I take this point here, and extend them. Notice that you can even take these small tiles that are running towards that. Anything that is running in that direction, almost vertical direction, is going to vanish into a single point. So the place that those lines run towards is your vanishing point. Notice, on the other hand, all other directions will remain normal and parallel to each other. So our vertical lines here are all vertical. They are parallel to each other. They do not go towards a point, they just run normal. Same with our horizontal. Of the 3 dimensions, length, width, and depth, only depth goes towards that vanishing point. And the same thing is true here. Our shapes of the pieces will still run parallel, and our horizontal lines still run parallel. However, the depth here runs towards a vanishing point, and I can find that vanishing point by tracing along these lines and seeing where they converge. So we find it's right there. Notice the artist here turned that into a sun to even make it more of a focal point. So the question is, that's all well and good. How can I do this drawing myself? Well, grab a piece of paper and let's try it out. So we're going to draw a rectangular prism in one-point perspective. And in order to do this, all you really need is a vanishing point, and you're going to need to face something head on. So you notice how our vertical and horizontal lines remained normal? Well, we're going to do that here. We're going to keep normal vertical and horizontal lines. We're going to draw a rectangle or a square to start out our prism. And you'll always start a one-point perspective drawing by looking at the face of the object. From that point, that means we have our length and our width. Our depth is going to run towards the vanishing point. So I'll extend it towards the vanishing point. Now you can do this very lightly. And notice how I'm not actually drawing the whole line to the vanishing point. I'm just drawing a segment of it. And I'm going to do the same thing over here where I will take the corner, the part that I will see, and I'm going to run it towards the vanishing point. And I can do that with a dotted line. I can do that with a solid line. And As long as the line is outside of your object, the face, you will have a line running towards the vanishing point. However, this corner, even though technically it does run towards the vanishing point, would not be visible to my eye, so I don't need to connect it. Once I have each of my corners of my shapes connected to the vanishing point, I can then run normal parallel horizontal lines to finish off my box. Of course, it's possible that you don't finish it off like the hallway that we had above and it continues on forever into that vanishing point. That is totally fine. But you can also end it so that this ends at a certain point. I'll also have a second one over here wrapping up this box, which is parallel to the start. Let me show you how this works as you rotate this object around. Your boxes will look different depending on where they are relative to the vanishing point. So if I'm doing a second rectangular box over here, again, I'm going to run it towards my vanishing point. I'm going to run this one a little bit further than before, and I'm going to stop before I reach it. I'm going to run my next depth line towards that vanishing point. So again, adjusting my ruler so it heads towards that vanishing point. I'm going to run it until I get about even with the previous one. I'm making a big one here. And along the top now, I can see still part of the top of the box. So I'm going to draw that in. I'm going to run it towards there, and then I'll stop over here. So again, once I have my initial lines drawn, I'm going to have to end it somewhere unless it hits the vanishing point itself. So I'll draw a vertical line parallel to the original. It doesn't get switched at all. I'll draw a horizontal line parallel to the original. Notice I went a little bit too far with the previous line. That's fine. I can erase that, or I could if I hadn't drawn in pen. And I have my box where I started with a face and headed there. If you started with an object that is even to the vanishing point, what you're going to find is that you'll only be able to draw part of it, and it might not look terribly similar to a rectangular prism. Because in this one, and let's have this go all the way to the vanishing point just for fun. If I run this all the way to the vanishing point, notice again, while I do have this object that seems to be bursting forward with these other boxes, these other faces, it won't actually have its top or its bottom visible, so you're going to end up with just this. And again, I could have cut it off before the vanishing point. I could have had it end here just by doing that parallel line, just like before, making this shape to add to my other ones. That is 1 point perspective. You could go further in these by adjusting the faces of the boxes. You can even do something artistic, like a railroad track heading into the sunset. I'm going to draw a horizon line. I'm going to pick my vanishing point. Maybe my vanishing point is on the horizon. Maybe it's above my horizon. And I can draw the tracks extending towards that horizon and the vanishing point. Mine maybe goes on a hill so it doesn't vanish fully. One thing to keep in mind with real objects is everything will be shrinking as you get closer and closer to the vanishing point. So everything will be getting smaller. That does include each of the separation pieces in the railroad track. So as you're adding your details, yes, these slats on the railroad track do not stop being parallel to each other as you draw them in. However, they will get closer and closer the closer and closer you get to your vanishing point. So you'll have to make them progressively smaller as you go on. But what we want to look at now is what happens with 2 point perspective. 2 point perspective is really where you have two vanishing points. Before we'd start with a face of an object and then draw one dimension out into a vanishing point. Here we're starting with the edge of an object. You can actually spot corners here, and you're going to extend 2 dimensions out towards 2 different vanishing points. So here our vertical stays consistent, but our depth and our width are going to be vanishing into these 2 points. This, by the way, is frequently where you get cities drawn in perspective, where they'll take a corner of a building and they'll draw the 2 sides extending out. And notice how every single line here is going to be heading towards a vanishing point unless it is vertical. So even the windows head towards that vanishing point. Even the doors head towards that vanishing point. The sidewalks, vanishing point. You have to be careful that the only thing that does not head towards either this vanishing point or this vanishing point is the vertical lines. You can even get really, really complex and detailed doing point perspective with vanishing points way out in the distance. So like this one, if I tried to trace my vanishing point, it wouldn't even be on the page. And that is entirely fine. It can add a lot of depth and make these things look way more realistic. Now, let's start with the basics in our drawings, drawing a rectangular prism in 2-point perspective. Just like before, we're going to start with 2 vanishing points. So these will be my 2 vanishing points. And I'm going to start with an edge, the only thing that is not affected by the vanishing point, and that will be vertical right here. Now this is going to take a few steps. Remember that you're going to be sending one direction towards one vanishing point and the other towards the second vanishing point. So here I'm going to take my line and I'm going to extend it very lightly towards my vanishing point. And I'll trace over later how far I want to go. But lightly trace over, maybe even give it some depth just so you know where you're going to head. And then I'll take the top vertice of what will be my rectangular prism, and I'm going to extend that in the same direction towards that other vanishing point. Very nice and light. Once I have this side done, I can choose my depth just like before. Remember before what we did is we said, well, we want this to end. We don't really want it to continue on to the vanishing point. So I'm going to take one, I'm going to send a vertical line upwards. Remember, vertical is going to be the only thing that is not affected. It will be parallel to the other vertical line. And I'll just darken these lines to it. If you want a greater effect, you can bring this further out. Second, I start to take the other side of the box. You can see where this rectangular prism is starting to take shape. We have one of the faces done. I'll again lightly extend it out from both vertices of that edge to the vanishing point. And here again, I'm going to pick where I want it to end, and I can make it go further than before. I can make it shorter. It's up to my own choice here. I can make that decision. And I end up with this. Now notice that this isn't done. Here, I'm still going to need a bottom to this box. So how do I do that? Well, don't forget that the bottom of this box is actually heading towards the right side of my paper, which means it needs to head towards that vanishing point because it's not vertical. So I'm going to take the corner piece and I'm going to connect that to the vanishing point in a very light line. Make sure that with this one, you don't even try necessarily to get the dark line drawn in first. So that's my first line. But when I draw in this, I can't just drop it down parallel because this side is going to head towards the left, towards my other vanishing point. So I actually want to connect this side to that vanishing point. Notice these will intersect, and that will be the other vertice on the base of this rectangular prism. So what we end up with is this. And we have this lovely floating box. You can add some depth and dimensions by shading certain sides. Maybe pick one fairly light, one dark, and it will affect where the light source appears to be coming from. Now, these will look different depending on where they are relative to these vanishing points. Were I to draw one lower, it would then show me the top of the box as opposed to the bottom of the box. And notice that if I draw one that runs between the 2 vanishing points, I'm not actually going to be able to see the top or bottom of the box. So I can quick show you how that works. Again, picking light lines drawn towards those vanishing points, selecting where I want the box to end. I'm going to make this one a little bit longer. And I end up with that side completed. I can even shade it lightly so it kind of matches with the one above. and I can finish up the other face, jumping ahead here so we don't run out of time, and you won't be able to see the top or bottom, so this one would be complete. Go ahead and check Classroom for what you need to do. I hope you guys all have a wonderful break.